We're pleased to have with us here today three outstanding photographers from three different countries, including Ukraine, who have done extensive photographic reporting from Ukraine. And we also have with us the publisher of FotoEvidence, Svetlana Bachevanova, and the moderator for today's panel, Leen. I'm particularly grateful to Sarah because in addition to moderating the panel, she's also entirely organized this panel. So thank you, Sarah. Starting out her career as a photographer with National Geographic for 20 years, Leen joined the staff as senior photo editor in 2004. And in 2013, she became the first female director of photography. She's won numerous awards for both her photography and photo editing, from Pictures of the Year, the World Press Photo Awards, and the International Photography Awards. She's edited 10 photo books since 2020, including Ukraine, a War Crime, the Picture of the Year Photo Book of the Year in 2023, We Cry in Silence by Smita Sharma, The Phoenician Collapse by Diego Ibarra Sanchez, and Ukraine, Love and War, which is what today's panel is based on. And this is just a partial list of Sarah's many awards and accomplishments. And today's event is being recorded and will be posted to the SDN YouTube channel within a few days. And we'll send out an email to everybody who's registered for this program when it's available with the link. So now let me turn this over to Leen.
Hello, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here with these amazing women. They're all incredible journalists and photographers and have a lot to say, which we will share with you today. Most of the work that we're focusing on today is the idea of the lives behind the front lines, which are every bit as important and impactful than the tragedies that you usually see coming out of the Ukraine. All of these photographers, Oksana, and Laetitia, and Natalie, have participated in both of the Ukraine books FotoEvidence has done, which I've had the privilege to edit and work with Svetlana on. And a third book is being created right now called War Chronicles. That's going to be published this year. That is a collaboration with the, and let's see if I get the UAAP, the United Association of Professional Photographers, UAPP. Right, yeah, that's it. So that's another one coming out, and that's only Ukraine photographers, which is very cool. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and then we can begin. So hold on one second. Okay. And okay. You see the title slide. I just had to show it. I don't have anything to say about the title slide, but I thought it was so nice that I wanted to share it with you. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing Oksana. Oksana is a self-taught Ukrainian photographer whose work explores human resilience and dignity among people facing challenges and hardships. She says, I am interested in stories that seem like they are about normal life, but it is not a normal life. It is important to do them to show the human side of war. When Russia was invaded in February, when Ukraine was invaded in February of 2022, Oksana and her husband, photojournalist Brendan Hoffman, were 6 months pregnant with their son, Luca. Luca is now 2.5 years old, and Oksana and her family have remained committed to living and working in Ukraine. Oksana publishes her work with many large media publications, both in the US and Europe. She's also a member of both Women Photography and the Journal Collective. When I asked her what brings her joy outside of her family, she said, eating sweets and swimming and diving underwater. It is like meditation. It feels so comfortable. In some dreamy, peaceful, imaginary life near the sea, I would be a diving instructor and take photos underwater. Please welcome Oksana Parafeniuk. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for this introduction. And hello, everybody. I even saw a cat among our guests, which is very exciting. Um, so I will start. I'll just add that I guess I will start that my path in journalism started in 2014 during the Revolution of Dignity. And I started first working as a fixer and translator and producer with foreign journalists. And photography was always my hobby for many years, even before that. But only when Ukraine started going through revolution and then Russia started the war in Eastern, and ex-Crimea started war in Eastern Ukraine, I understood that I want to become a photojournalist myself. And so for a few years, I was photographing different things and projects, and I was always interested in topics of social change. And as Sarah said, people facing hardships and how they do that with dignity and where do they find resilience. And I myself grew up in the 90s after the Soviet Union collapse, and my parents had really hard time, making any money. And so I think that was like a foundation for my interest since very early on. And so a few months before Russia invaded Ukraine, of course, there was already a lot of news that that might happen, and the media interest was really high. And this is when I started photographing what was happening, mostly in Kiev, before then, and how people, as you see in this photo, were preparing for something big and the war, and that many people didn't believe would happen. Yet a lot of people felt it's important to do something, even if it's just training with wooden guns. Next slide, please. I photographed, of course, as well, soldiers and former soldiers who were retraining or coming back or preparing to come back to the military. And next slide. And also very young people like this couple who came like for the first time just to see what it's like, because they said they just couldn't sit still and not do anything. They were scared for the invasion. This was just maybe 2 weeks before February 24th. During all of those months of working every day nonstop, I was pregnant myself. And as a Ukrainian and someone we lived in Kiev and we live in Kiev now, I was worried and had a lot of anxiety myself about what's going to happen. And when the invasion did happen and we heard first explosions in Kiev, it felt really surreal. And we decided to leave Kiev the next day because we didn't know what was going to happen. And that moment, maybe even weeks before that, I could still, almost be an observer as a photojournalist and take distance or some distance from stories and people I was photographing. But that very day, that line was just gone because we became refugees ourselves and we had to leave. And for the next few months, both me and my husband, who's also a photojournalist, kept working, even though it was extremely difficult. And we moved from place to place because it was really hard to find places to live. And we moved like 15 apartments and hotel rooms ourselves. And ended up in Poland for a few months to give birth to Luca. And so we took a break from working. And in the meanwhile, we were like watching the work of other colleagues and what was happening in Ukraine. So this is some of the photographs that I took the first months after the invasion. It was difficult, this like desire to cover the war, but also the impossibility of it being in a very like the most dangerous places as I was pregnant. So I tried to find some away from the frontline scenes, like this women cooking food for soldiers. And next slide. And of course, since the day number one, there were a lot of funerals. This was a funeral of 3 soldiers in Lviv in Western Ukraine. And it was like, I remember this moment so well. I was pregnant and I could hear Luca moving inside of my belly while, mothers were crying because they lost their sons. It was just heartbreaking, as it is every day to cover this war. And live here. And so then Luca was born, and we really wanted to come back to Ukraine. We felt it's very important to try to work. And when Luca was only 1 month old, we were back in Kiev, and this is him in our bed in Kiev. He looks like it really felt like we brought this little angel into this darkened world by violence coming from Russia. And I tried to work when he was 3 months old, but then the big missile attack. So this photo was taken by Brendan when Luca was 4 months old. There was the first massive missile attack on energy infrastructure. And I understood the very moment sitting in that subway with Luca that I just would not be able to leave him even for a day. And I made a decision to, even though it was extremely difficult, to not do photojournalism for some time until I feel like I'm ready to leave him for a day or two. And so it took me a year before I came back to photographing and doing assignments and documenting the war. During that time, so Luca here is more than 1 year old. We still like sometimes go to the subway during air raid alerts and missile attacks. And then, often we come out of the subway and one of us goes to report on the damage of that missile strike. So we like constantly living this life of being in it fully ourselves, but also trying to document it for the audience abroad, which I think is also gives us, it's helpful to know exactly what it feels like to live here, to do an empathetic coverage, but it is also makes it really difficult on a personal level. Next slide, please. So among the work I was mostly focusing in the last 2 years, where one of the themes was stories of soldiers who were injured on the front line, but coming back to their home life. And in this photo, this young couple, they're like married already after his injury, and they had a baby. And so for me, it was important to see what happens after the most traumatic, events on the front line. And I also made a decision to try to be, say, on the safer side, also because we have a small son. And I also saw that and just the way I work, I could contribute more photographing stories away from the front line. Next, please. And this is Ivan. He completely lost his eyesight because of the frontline injury. And this is his newborn son the next day after he was born. And the son he would never be able to see. There was also a very heartbreaking story to work on. We focused on fathers who couldn't see their children. Next one. And then also a third part of this like big the story project was on veterans who had facial injuries and how complicated it is to restore the faces. It actually takes years and years and dozens of surgeries to be able to have your face back and to be able to eat and talk. Next, please. And so this was a big project published in the Washington Post. And I just think it was important because, there was almost not known like how complicated the process of facial injury is, and the life for these people will really be, it's your face, it's how people meet you. And I think it's also mentally really challenging for veterans to then leave having really severe injuries to your face. So these are 2 out of 8 men we photographed for this story. It also shows a span of how they're very young, like Aram on the left, he's only 20 years old, and Alexander is 53, how there's just, a huge variety of ages of men fighting right now. And next, please. The other big theme I was trying to focus on in the last 2 years was looking at how war affects women in many different ways. And, what choices women make and why, and whether they decide to go fighting, and also just focusing on often very quiet heroism women do, like including, not only going to the front line and fighting, but often, taking care of families and while also working and volunteering and doing so many other things, which I think is often underreported by media. Next slide. And this was a story about women who go to see their husbands on the front line. So this was a house on the front line where Yevgenia's husband lives. And the women who don't want to wait for 6 months or a year to see their husbands and decide to take this dangerous journey to keep their love alive. And next one, please. And of course, there were a lot of stories about loss, a lot of stories about grief. And this was a funeral after a big missile strike on Poltava military institute that killed more than 50 people and injured 200. And unfortunately, this happens almost every day in Ukraine. And next story. And then two of the most heartbreaking stories I worked on was about Yaroslav in this photo, who lives in Western Ukraine, which is considered much safer than most of Ukraine. But in a missile strike on a residential building, he lost his entire family, a wife, and all of his 3 daughters. And that was honestly really difficult to photograph. And I tried to make a sensitive photo while still showing how terrible it is. And the next one. And this was a story about so Lizzie, the girl in the photo, she lost her mom, which she looks at this photo, and her little newborn brother in a drone strike on Odessa. And to me, again, like being Ukrainian and being a mother myself and living in Ukraine is making these stories a lot more difficult to cover on an emotional level, but also it gives me the sense how important it is even more. And I also photographed, when you talk about Ukraine and show photos, it does seem like it, and it is very, very terrible and tragic, everything that is happening. But there's also a lot of light, a lot of love, and a lot of dignity, and births of new children. Many women decide to have children even while living here, which is very courageous, like Maria in this photo. And the next photo, please. And this one before last photo, I just wanted to show because I know I'm running out of my time, so it's gonna be quick. This was a trip I did to Kharkiv. So I didn't work for a year, and then I worked in safer parts of Ukraine. And then Kharkiv seemed to me like it's much closer to Russia. It's often under missile strikes. And I felt so nervous. And we had to go and cover this first day of school. That was one of the stories. And I felt so nervous. And then we showed up to the school, and it's full of little children dressed in Ukrainian embroidery shirts, happy, and there's this stuffed animals, and it's just so much full of life. And then you just realize how important it is for us as journalists to go to places and actually show what it's like. Of course, photograph can't really show you the whole picture, but it gives you so much more sense of how diverse, life is, and that life still happens in so many different ways. And the next photo. And just the last photo, it's me and Luca. He is almost 3 now. And, we thought when we moved back to Ukraine that, the war might be over by the time he understands what's happening and learns to talk. But unfortunately not. Luca knows words drone and missile. He can differ. He knows that he needs to go to the corridor or subway when there is air raid alert. And sometimes, like in this photo, during the air raid alert and drone attack, we read books before bed in the corridor on the floor. And while at other times it feels like we have absolutely normal lives too. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Oksana. That was beautiful. Before we were the audience came in, you were talking about how Luca has learned to tell jokes. And I was wondering, how much does humor in your family and with your friends like help you all cope with what's going on in Ukraine?
Oh, it's definitely a huge part of our life. And again, like, yeah, we joke all the time. Sometimes it's, could be slightly dark humor, or sometimes, when we go, it will sound so strange, but we will go like to the subway. For example, there is a big missile attack. And we would go to the subway in the middle of the night, spend 3 hours, and then, we would come out. And like sometimes there's no missiles that fly in Kiev, and it flies other places. And obviously it's all very, very bad. But then we would come out and be like, well, we went for nothing this time. Or like things like this, that you just, yeah, just keeps you like, you try to make sense out of it. And also, with my friends, we have this group with my sister and three more girlfriends that we started shortly after the full-scale invasion. That was like huge mental support. I think like 60% or 50% of things we send in the chat in this group is different memes, about what's going on, about politics, about this and about cats and children as well. But, it really helps you to cope with so many terrible news.
Thank you. Glenn, do we have any questions from the audience yet? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Glenn.
No questions yet. Just a lot of accolades for the work that people have just seen.
Okay.
We do have time for one question from the audience. So if anybody would like to just ask one question before we move on, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it.
Don't be shy. If you've ever been on panels or done panels before, the questions are always the favorite part. So please feel free to participate.
And we will have a longer Q&A at the very end.
At the end, yeah. Okay. I'm going to move ahead with Laetitia. Laetitia Vancon is a French photographer based in Munich, Germany. She is recognized for her powerful and thoughtful visual journalism, shedding light on humanitarian and environmental stories. Trained as a chemical engineer, Laetitia discovered photography later in life, initially as a form of therapy. She says, I have spent years on assignment capturing everyday moments that make larger narratives intimately relatable. My work is about bearing witness to individual stories that connect with our shared humanity, always prioritizing empathy and understanding. Laetitia began working in Ukraine at the start of the Russian invasion in 2022 and did her first assignment in Odessa. In 2023, she returned to Ukraine and has since focused on documenting the lives of young people, revealing moments of courage and hope. Her work is currently part of an exhibition called Inside Ukraine at the Leica Gallery in New York City, paired with the work of photojournalist Lindsay Adario. And if you're in New York, it will be on view until April 20th. I asked Laetitia what she does to relax, and she said, I surf. I like to surf on the river in Munich. And you're going to have to look that up because it's complicated how they do it there, but there's a big wave. I go at night so I can have it all to myself. It is the only time my head is focused in the moment. It is a way to reconnect with my core. And I really need to see a photo, Laetitia, of you surfing on the river. So you got to get that for me. So please welcome Laetitia Vancon. Oops, sorry. Here we go. Sorry.
I will. Thank you, Sarah, for this great introduction. I will rather send you then a video because I think it's more in video. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm very honored to be able to share my work with you about Ukraine, but it will be actually mainly about humanness in a war. And to start, I'm just going to put things back into context. In February 2022, to be honest, when I knew very little about Ukraine, and I knew nothing about covering conflicts. But when Russia started its full-scale invasion, I think we all can remember how overwhelming the human tragedy felt back then. Personally, I was glued to the news. I couldn't believe it, and I was just powerless, feeling so powerless. And after 48 hours, I asked my editors from the New York Times if I could be from any help. This is how I've been sent to Moldova, Palanca, the border crossing of Palanca, where thousands of women and kids were trying to cross back then in order to find safety on the other side. This is where I met Monica, that you can see on the pictures here, with her kids and her friends' kids on the lap, squeezed in a car with all her belonging she could grab at the last minute, totally exhausted, waiting for hours to be able to cross the border, but still trying to hold strong in front of the kids, making them believe they were going on a short time for a vacation. Next, please. All the people crossing the borders at that time carries a story of first survival, then separation, often displacement, exile, and for sure uncertainties. This is like this story were heartbreaking for me, and I still carry them with me. At that time, I wanted to understand what was happening in those cities the people were fleeing, but I couldn't cross because I didn't have what we call a HEFAT training. It's a security training, which allowed us journalists to work with the press in a conflict zone. And therefore, I continue for a while, documented the refugee crisis. Then I went back home. I did this training. And finally, in June 2022, I was assigned in Odessa, where I could enter this time with my security training. So, when I arrived in Odessa, 100 days of war have passed almost. Tens of thousands of people died. Millions have been displaced, and incalculable amount of monuments, historical sites, cultural landmarks, houses have been destroyed. But in Odessa, the war has taken on a phase like nowhere else. You have to imagine I arrived with the spring, so the city was full of colors, the nature was blooming, and what I saw first was people with an unstoppable urge to regain a sense of normality at all costs. That doesn't matter what. Despite the threat of the Russian missile, despite the sea mines, despite the Russian troops at the doorstep in Mykolaiv, the war was everywhere, in the air, in the sea, and in every story we will encounter. But as much as life was coming back, and this is what I'm going to show you in the next picture, which will have all the pictures are going to be only about Odessa. So in this picture, for instance, we are with students who couldn't celebrate their graduation, and therefore they asked their teacher to record their art performance, so they were dancing, in order then to be able to share this video on social media in order to show to the rest of the world what they have lost, what the war has taken from them. But also it was their way, to transform their frustration into something else, into something creative, into expression. And for me, it's a beautiful example of resilience. Next, please. On these pictures, you can see young men who didn't enroll as volunteer soldiers, but they wanted absolutely to be part of the war effort. That was a huge solidarity of the society back then. And to do so, they were basically handcrafting all day long these plates for territorial defense and for soldiers on the front line, because back then those very basic gears were missing. Next, please. On these pictures on the background, so it's a little bit the same approach as the first one with the sandbags showing the war. Here you will see that on this painting, you can see Odessa as it used to be. A couple dating, kids strolling around, a man heading to work. And then on the foreground, you have this stark reminder of the war with these two men from the territorial defense taking a break at the amusement park in Odessa. Next, please. When I say that in Odessa, the war has taken on a face like nowhere else, this is one example of it, strong example. Like this couple, you have to imagine from their position, there is a breathtaking view on the harbor of Odessa, a high targeted place. It was targeted last week, 4 people died. And when I'm taking the pictures, the air sirens are going off. So, but for them, there is no time anymore to hide. They want to do the best out of the time which they have left. And they hold on what the enemy is taking from them, meaning or trying to erase their freedom of to live, to love, to simply exist. That is their way to resist the adversity. And I'm conscious that these pictures are somehow seems maybe far from a country at war, but actually they show the complexity of what is experiencing a population. And Odessa was not a background of destruction. It was also its people and the way they preserve a sense of humanity, how they celebrate small victories like these ladies, like this rose ceremony for nurses and doctors at the hospital for showing appreciation of their work and their dedication. Or like, next please, this IDP, so this internal displaced family. So they were from Kherson. They found a place in Odessa to start new. The little boy was so released and asked his mom if the war was over because he simply didn't hear anymore the heavy artillery every day. Another kind of small victories, like, can you please, next slide? Like this small victories inside the church, meaning like the Ukrainian Orthodox Church get independence of Moscow Patriarchate at that time. And that was a significant break into Russian influence into society, because a lot of in Ukraine, a lot of people are still believers. So that was a very important move. I think that at the end, those images, they kind of allow the people photographed in it to exist beyond their statue of victims. And that's a way to restore dignity. Next, please. And dignity, this is what I saw first in Anna. Anna is 67 years old. She is in Mykolaiv. This is the pictures in Mykolaiv. And a living miracle, because she survived a missile strike, a missile attack, because she opened a fridge exactly on the same moment the missile hit the building. That's why her hand is damaged and not the rest. And so therefore the fridge shield her and protect her. And when I met Anna, she was gathering her things, and she has lost everything, but not her dignity. And I think this is, we are overflowed, as everybody say, with images of the war. But those images like Oksana, and which Natalie is going to show as well, like this daily life, also pictures are it's also a way to show how somehow the war have creeps in every in every daily life things, and for everyone in very different way. So, and somehow it also help, I believe, or I hope, to show a different perspective on the conflict, to broaden the narrative of war photography, and and hopefully to also keep engage the audience with it. I think I'm good on the timing.
Very good. Do we have an audience question for Laetitia? Do you see anything?
Nothing in the chat, but again, if somebody wants to ask a question, please just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it.
Because I have a question.
Go for it.
So Laetitia, I read an interview where you said, ultimately, I'm interested in the stories that lie at the intersection of the personal and the political. Can you say a little bit about the kinds of stories that you are finding at that intersection, and maybe also a little bit about the other battlefields?
Sure. Yeah, first I will try to, because this is a bit complex, I found, but it's a sentence. But yeah, what is interesting, I think, is on this compelling stories, because the political, which is sometimes often very abstract and unreachable, is meeting with personal, meaning that individual stories are shaped by larger forces, and therefore the human experiences through it are giving a depth on these broader societal issues. And so, for example, if we talk about I will start with immigration, like this lady I showed earlier on the presentation, is like, we can look at the movement on the border crossing, but we can, I rather will focus on the emotional weight of displacement, and the consequences of it, and the longing for the place you have, the people you have left behind, and how you resettle, and so on. And war is political, and therefore it has, beginning a war lasting for 3 years is something. But what it means for the young people, and this is a project I didn't show today, but I'm working on for now 2 years and more. It has impacted definitely the life of the young people, like what is about then this Marina, for example, one of my protagonists, who have lost her boyfriend, letting behind 2 young kids, what it is to mourn and at the same time raising almost a newborn and a young boy. Or Teren, who lost his 2 legs. And so what is to be living at 23 years old and being a veteran and having all his life in the front with this new challenge somehow. That this is what I mean by this. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, the personal and the political. That's great. And we're going to show some of the spreads from the book where when Svetlana is speaking. So we'll see some of those other battlefield pictures then.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you so much. Natalie Keyssar is a documentary photographer based in Brooklyn, New York. Her work focuses on the personal effects of political turmoil and conflict, youth culture, and migration. She has been published in many major publications and supported by grants from the Pulitzer Center to the Magnum Foundation. Natalie loves to meditate when she can, climb, and hang with her girl dog, Charlie. Her early relationship with Ukraine comes from her Ukrainian great-grandparents. About working in Ukraine, she says, there's this psychological cocktail of rage and grief and desire to act. And since I don't have any actual useful skills, although we could debate that, I'm not a doctor or a psychologist or an aid worker or a fighter. I felt the need to do something. There is also a totally selfish need to see it for myself. It's compulsive enough to make you get on a plane to go to a country that's quite dangerous and in horrific turmoil. Please welcome Natalie Keyssar.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and
Sure.
thank you to you and Glenn for putting this together. And it's really cool for me to share this space with Oksana and Laetitia because I admire you guys so much and feel really honored to be working in this space. And thank you, Svetlana, for putting these books together, which have meant so much to the whole community that, you know, that cares about Ukraine inside and out. So this all means a lot to me. And Oksana and Laetitia have said so many of the things I really believe in about doing this work and about the situation in Ukraine. And so I'll try to keep my thoughts fresh and not, you know, rehash. But so as Sarah mentioned, my great grandparents are Ukrainian, but I'm, as it said on the slide, which, gonna be real, currently gave me a little sense of cringe. Like, I'm very American. Natalie Keyssar, USA. I'm from here. So my first experience of Ukraine, which is my ancestral homeland, was going there to cover, as Laetitia did first, the refugee crisis on the border. I arrived on day 3 of the full-scale invasion, and then eventually entered, and I've worked on a ton of assignments since then. I've made, I don't know how many, actually, I think maybe 6 trips in the last 3 years since the full-scale invasion began. Usually stay for a couple of months. And the way that I work is usually I do a lot of news assignments, and I cover the front lines and the rear front lines and the cities that are still having frontline type experiences because they're still in missile range, but far less so, as Oksana and Laetitia covered. And something that, you know, I love to work covering breaking news and doing more, especially in Ukraine. I feel like as photojournalists, so often every assignment is, you know, presents all kinds of geopolitical and ethical complications. And in Ukraine is no different, but in a certain way, there is a sense of purpose to my assignment work in Ukraine. Because of the simplicity of the evil that's being enacted on Ukraine by Russia. You know, so many of our situations when we're working in political turmoil or violent situations is super complex, and of course that exists in almost any conflict, but often working for the news, I question my purpose, which is something we can discuss in the Q&A if we want. But in Ukraine, I feel like covering the news, showing the effects of this grinding invasion with no regard for human life, with no regard for civilians, has given me a lot of sense of purpose. But it was also my first full-scale conflict. And I'd worked in a lot of other very violent situations, but I'd never worked under air assault or with artillery or any of this. Never seen this scale of destruction. And so the personal side of the work that I've been doing has sort of mixed work made on assignment. Thank you, Sarah, you read my mind. Has mixed the work that I've made on assignment that's covering a lot more of the sort of events and drumbeat of trauma and destruction with sort of the more personal aspect. And I think it's very important when we're talking about photojournalism and news photography and really journalism in general, that I actually think it's important to attempt not to make such a distinction between work made on the front lines or not on the front lines. I think we have those who have not experienced war, those who are lucky enough to have not experienced war, I think we experience it as an abstract concept that's sort of amalgamated from footage that we see and videos we see and things that we read. And people have a hard time understanding that a country at war, not every part of it is at war all the time. And that, you know, that daily life continues. And I think part of that misconception, of course, you know, any of us can tell you there's a massive difference in daily life in Konstantinivka and Kiev, right? As you know, it's a frontline city and a city that is under frequent air assault, but has good air, you know, has relatively good air defenses, which I hope are preserved by our despicable government. But you know, so there, of course, there's a very different experience depending on your distance from the front line. But the Ukrainian people, you know, nobody is unaffected by this, and the violence is all over the country, and it's good. And as so much of the work we've seen so far, I think really beautifully shows, and as Laetitia touched on, like, it's interwoven, it's intermingled. And so for me, you know, in previous bodies of work, it's really important to maybe stop creating artificial separation between, you know, the Ukrainian people, if they are not personally traveling back and forth to the front lines to visit their husband or to fight or to volunteer or whatever, then they're the people that they love are. And so I started to focus my projects on love. I started to, in my own sort of free time and in between time while doing more sort of newsy assignments. And really, the reason I started was because seeing Ukrainians in love was giving me like air to breathe when I felt like I was drowning in suffering. And I kept seeing couples in parks, like the first image of a couple that Sarah showed was on the very, very early days of the war, a soldier saying goodbye to his lover at the train station, which was, you know, the type of image we were seeing a lot. But I mean, that was the first time I'd probably been in Ukraine for a week when I photographed that image that I was, and one of the only times in my entire memory of my career that I was just bawling while I was shooting. I don't do that. Not saying I'm against it. I just tend to freeze up, like, anyways. But I realized that to me, seeing people in love both gave me a sense of hope, and I felt a proximity to what one of the massive sources of the Ukrainians' resilience, which was they're fighting for the people that they loved. They'll do anything for the people that they loved, and just being near that energy, it like drew me during such dark times when everybody was so scared and we were seeing so much violence. And I really, for almost my own sanity, like in between assignments, going up to couples and that I would see in public at first and just being like, hey, how'd you guys meet? Can you tell me your love story? And people would kind of look at me and be like, are you fucking out of your mind? Like, with the, you know, at first there was this like record skip of like, why are you asking me about this right now? But when I started to explain that I wanted to understand the war through the lens of love, people were really excited to share the brightest and most important part of their life. You know, and eventually over the past 3 years, that this has led me to a long-term project photographing primarily, although not exclusively, young people in love, because I'm also very interested in youth always. So this is Andriy and Alina, who became sort of somewhat celebrities. It's a, you know, the concept of war celebrity is a weird thing, but it's a real thing. And Andriy was nearly fatally wounded in the Donbass as the commander of a unit that he founded when there were no available units to join in the beginning of the war. And his wife Alina, and he was terribly wounded, and he lost his eyes and his hands, and had all kinds of other injuries. And I've been, you know, working with them for the last couple of years for this project. But what strikes me is they're always making out like teenagers while we're hanging out and doing interviews. I mean, we have such a sense of this separate, you know, of course the experience of war is horrific and devastating, but it's, you know, love is unimpacted, and almost, if anything, amplified in these circumstances. We can go to the next slide. This is a photograph that from the same funeral that Oksana showed in Lviv, when those three young soldiers were killed in the very beginning of the war by a missile strike, and it was horrific. And also you know, the complexity of media being present while people are mourning, you know, was also really uncomfortable. Oksana and I saw each other for the first time, I think, during the full-scale invasion in that moment, and we're exchanging a lot of devastated looks. And God, it was good to see you that day. It was a very rough day. And we can move to the next. So that, you know, the way that I sort of have put this together, it jumps around in time and space, which is really my experience and something that I really believe in as an outsider covering a story that's not my own, is that I end up in my sort of personal edits of the work trying to give a sense of exploration. I feel like our role as outsiders are, you know, Oksana and the lots of other amazing Ukrainian photographers can tell this story far, far, far more intimately, with more knowledge, with much more expertise than I can. And then more so than any foreign photographer can, in my opinion. But what I can try to bring in is a sense of exploration and a sense of my own process of learning more in the country, more and more of the country, and getting to know these people. So I find myself weaving these portraits, like the last one we just saw of one of my, not that I have favorites, but I love Nastya and Stus. They're a 22 and 24-year-old drone unit commander and combat medic who previously were an activist and a journalist, and then fell in love on the front lines. And we could move on to the next slide. You know, this was a really well done party in Kharkiv in the late 2022, when Kharkiv was very dark at the time, although it was in a slightly more peaceful moment. But you know, I think that concept, we can keep rolling, of the complexity and the surreal mixture of experience that the Ukrainians are having, and that I'm learning about as I'm traveling around the country, is really important for me to show. This is Sofia, originally from Luhansk, who had just escaped the occupied territories when I made this portrait of her. She was very exhausted, but happy to be safe and in a refugee center. And this was the impact mark on the ground from a shell that killed a couple of children. This was the kitchen table the day that Bucha was liberated, or the day after Bucha was liberated, from a home of two men who had managed to hunker down and stay in their home throughout the entire occupation, very much at the center of a crossfire. And so, you know, again, this sort of theme of really weaving together the reality of daily life, whether you're at the front or the rear. This is Sasha holding her twin babies, who were like Luca. They were born several months after the war began, and Sasha's husband is his name's Friel. He's a very well-known Ukrainian activist and rapper, and you know, they had these twin babies, decided to stay in Ukraine. He's using his sort of high profile to raise a lot of money and buy arms for the military. And Sasha is, you know, and they're raising these twins, and they have to go down 20 flights of stairs because they live in a high rise every time there's an attack. And we can keep moving. And I don't want to go over time because I was making jokes about how women don't go over time and men do, and I don't want to be a hypocrite, and I already am. But you know, this project is ongoing, and you know, exploring and I have long stories about every single image, which I'll try not to tell here because we don't have time. But one of the things that I'm looking forward to and currently working on is, after 3 years of collecting portraits and stories and reportage, I'm currently working on turning the series of love stories, particularly with the 5 couples that I've become closest to, into a documentary film, so that, you know, I can work collaboratively with these couples, and we can start to bring their voices and their experiences and their own correspondence into telling their story together through the lens of their relationships. So we can talk more about any of this, and this is sort of what I mean about like this was entering Bakhmut, which very much at the time was the front line. A lot of times in my work, I think I'm more attracted to images of tension and fear, or images that capture beauty or energy than I am to images of pure destruction, as important as I think those images are. And I do make them. I think that what I end up gravitating towards is a lot more about the emotional experience of proximity to these issues. This was the funeral of Pavlo Parafeniuk, who was a young Ukrainian fighter who was very, very well loved, who was killed last spring. Artem, who was kidnapped by Russians, like thousands and thousands of Ukrainian children who are still kidnapped in Russia and whose fate is not being accounted for in current debates about the peace accord, which is really concerning. But Artem fell in love with a teenage girl who was also in captivity named Nina, and they were both rescued by their mothers. And he is now home safe from Russia, which is really beautiful. And this was a man who was executed in Bucha while wearing a white sleeve to indicate he was a civilian. He was very elderly and clearly had been shot. And this was Bucha 2 years later as they started to rebuild. So obviously, in lieu of being local as a parachuting foreigner, I do think it's been really, really important to my process to keep returning to places once they're outside of the spotlight and see how that slow recovery is going. This is Natalia and Anton, both snipers, part of my project. And we can roll through here. Martia and Olga, both women in love with different, one of them is in love with a musician and one of them is in love with a soldier. I'll let you guess which one based on who's holding the grenade. And this is, okay, last story, and then I'm going to wrap it up because I'm talking too much. But this is a group of teenage friends who graduated high school last year who I met for a Rolling Stone piece about daily life for teens in Kyiv. And in the center, you will see, listening to whatever we're showing, young Misha, who helps build drones for his father's drone unit after school, and Khlib, who's a refugee from an occupied territory who now lives in Kyiv, is hanging out with Anna Donets, who is a young photographer. She's now 18. I happened to see her working at Pavlo Parafeniuk's funeral when I was there photographing it, and I saw the young Ukrainian girl who looked so young, and she was moving so expertly with so much sensitivity and dignity, you know, which is a really, really, really hard thing to do as a photojournalist. And I was really struck by it because I was like, that photographer must be super talented. Like, she looks so young, but she's navigating this funeral so well. And I really wanted to know who she was, but there was this huge crush of people, and I was on assignment and I need to be following somewhere else. And very luckily, I had an appointment at a high school later that day to keep working on stories of young Ukrainians, and she happened to be among the students. And so I was able to meet her. She's incredibly talented. She's making excellent work. I will drop her website in the chat. I think she might even be here. If you're here, hi, Anna.
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
Her work is so good that Rolling Stone, I showed it to Rolling Stone, and they ended up including it in the piece that we published. So she published a slideshow in Rolling Stone with me, so it was very cool to share that space. And I think I'm gonna wrap it up there because I'm talking too long. Thank you guys so much.
Great, Natalie. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Why don't we hold audience questions until we're completely done after Svetlana? But I'd just like to ask the audience, if you have questions, please start thinking about them. You can put them in the chat and I'll read them. or if you'd like to ask your questions yourself, just raise your digital hand and I'll call on you. And that'll be in a few minutes.
Yeah. I had one question for Natalie. You said that you struggle with the limits of photography to communicate beyond the horrors of war. The images of conflict can simultaneously rivet and alienate. How has this feeling driven your choices about what stories you do in Ukraine?
Thank you. I think we're always looking for, I think that if we photograph things the same way, whether it's a feature or a portrait or a frontline, especially in the context of frontline work, it's very dramatic. It gets a lot of attention, a building on fire, the moment of a strike, smoke around weaponry, all of these things. I think we need to see that. I really believe in it. I make those images. But I think that we run the risk if we start photographing war in the way that we are supposed to photograph war, in the way that we're used to seeing war. And again, if we separate that from daily life as though there is some kind of artificial separation and those soldiers aren't people and they are not going home to their families and they are not fighting the war surrounded by homes that often still have people in them, like those separations, I think they tend to, for people who haven't experienced it, give this false sense of like war happens in bad war places to people that are not like me. And I think, so my goal in photography, and I think one of our shared goals is really to introduce you to the people and help you understand the personal experience, obviously, because that creates a sense of understanding, hopefully solidarity and empathy. But I think also for me, it really pushes me towards trying to think of different kinds of images that I can make of this stuff and different forms of storytelling, try to make it more collaborative, trying to, think about sort of different visual languages to apply to this, because I do think that we live in a different time, right, than Vietnam, for example, which is, the napalm girl, these famous images, which we think of as images that could have contributed to ending a conflict, which, I think we don't live in a time, Gaza's absolute devastation, the genocide of Gaza being a perfect example of, if all it took was people seeing the images of Ukrainian civilians and Gazan civilians and Sudanese civilians being bombed for us to collectively as a world to say this has to stop, then that logic is flawed. It doesn't happen. So what do we do to get people to stop scrolling? What do we do to get people to invest? And I don't think I have the solution, but I think it pushes me towards more exploration and experimentation in the work to try to figure out what languages and forms of storytelling we can engage people. And for me, a lot of times that's introducing you to people that I feel like my American friends and my community can relate to. Because on a small level, I think that's the best I can do is try to make inroads in my own communities.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate your insights so much.
Thank you.
Svetlana, we're all kind of here today because of Svetlana and the books that she's been creating. She's the executive director of the FotoEvidence Association. She's a Bulgarian American photojournalist and the co-founder of FotoEvidence Press. The books she and her team publish aim to expose injustice, create evidence of violations of human rights, and inspire social change. Svetlana conceived the FotoEvidence Book Award and the FotoEvidence W Award to support the work of photographers dedicated to the pursuit of human rights who are publishing work that is unlikely to find commercial publication. Under her management, FotoEvidence occupies a unique space in the world of photojournalism as both a publishing house and an activist organization. When I asked Svetlana what she does for herself, she said, "For pleasure, I go to the beach. I fish. I eat dark chocolate, me too. And I bike and work in the garden. I also cook exotic meals, and I haven't had one yet, so I'm going to be on your list. So we're going to just look now at some of the pages from the book that also display Oksana and Laetitia's and Natalie's work. And we'll have a little chat as we just go through these. So Svetlana, how did you come to the decision to create two multi-photographer books about the war in Ukraine, Ukraine a War Crime, and Ukraine Love Plus War? And now the third one you're publishing this year, War Chronicles, with the UAPP.
Hi, Sarah and everyone. Thank you, Glenn, for organizing. I feel really privileged to be with these photographers that were part of the book, and I know how dedicated they are and strong women. I would say first, why books? Starting from what Natalie was just saying, how to find a way to, what form. So before starting photo evidence 15 years ago, I thought what that could be. And at the end, I thought books. Why books? I mean, they're familiar, they're accepted objects at every level of the society and all around the world. Usually the stories told in books communicate social issues beyond the front page news and educate about the root of conflicts and human rights violation. And I think that's very important because one of the way of having impact with photography is by introducing the roots, educate people. It's not that something happened, there was something before that. And as much as we know, we would better understand what is in the present and we will remember for the future. So the book stays as evidence on shelves in the homes and libraries, keeping the stories that shape the world. They're not like newspapers or web pages that disappear. Books are often seen as a threat and burned. And that's why I created Photo Evidence to keep memories and to inspire social change through the work we publish and promote. And why the books about Ukraine? You mentioned that I'm partially Bulgarian. So I grew up in Bulgaria, and that was the time that Bulgaria was under communist regime and very close to the Soviet sphere of influence. So I know very well what the Russians are capable for. And when the war started and we saw the development in the first month, for me it was absolutely clear that we need to record this because at the end, based on my experience back in Bulgaria, there would be no record. So we issued a call, and I was extremely touched by the response of the photojournalist community that unite in such a strong way. We put the first book, Ukraine a War Crime, that records war crime committed by Russian in Ukrainian soil. We put this book together for 4 months, 93 photojournalists, over 6,000 images delivered for the book. And there was such a dedication and organization, and there was no waiting. Everybody was just sending, updating with better picture. It was just unbelievable. I thought that was the way photojournalists to tell what they witness, and also probably to publish images that maybe would not be published, because thinking about what to include in the book, I remember Sarah asked me, Svetlana, how far we can go with what we show there, and I said we're going far to the end. So we decided that everything that was photographed and delivered for the book, we put a section with dark pages with the most dark images of that work. And I think it's extremely important to record this and then to populate libraries, especially in Ukraine, so people would remember what happened. The second book we did starting from 2014, these 10 years of Russian invasion, and actually focusing more on the effects war have on children and women, men when they return home. It's about the consequences of the war. And then the second book was again by a group of 95 international photojournalists. In the third book, we decided that we're going to do only with Ukrainian photographers and start again from 2014. And I found really a huge difference in the work. It's like the foreign photographers go there and they're on assignment. And the Ukrainian photographers just live there and they photograph everything they see around. So we were able to see images that were, for me, surprising, unknown. And I believe that that book, War Chronicles, will be very strong. Do I talk too much?
No, you answered the questions I had already. So I was just thinking when you were talking, so for you, the books are as much about preserving history as they are about photography.
I think we can preserve history without photography. No picture, no story. So it's both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important. So when we were doing the Ukraine war crime, at that time, you hadn't decided to do a second book of this one, Love and War. But so what made you decide that you would keep going and do another book?
There were several. First, I started to receive a lot of messages from people that follow the work of FotoEvidence and have the book, the first book. They said, you can't stop, right? What? You publish this book and that's it? You have to continue. And I thought, and then observing the development and seeing the images of children going back to school, the schools that do not exist, the kind of increasing patriotic education of young people, the soldiers without limbs coming back, and it's not sure that they would be accepted, that they would receive the best they can. Reports of sexual violence against women. I thought all this needs to be preserved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then in the most recent book, well, in all the books, I really appreciated how you brought in illustrations, drawings from children, and especially the voices of the photographers, using their testimonies as part of the book. I feel like was something what really deepened the experience of the book.
Yeah, and also I thought that always people don't know who is behind the camera. People don't really wonder who is behind the camera. And in this case, we have photographs as a documentation of war crimes. And then we have a second layer by the testimony of the photographer telling in that particular day, behind this image, what happened, what he saw, what he witnessed, what he photographed. So put this thing together, I thought it was a good idea.
Mm. So besides publishing all the books, you do a lot of exhibitions from the books all across Europe. How does the exhibitions further your mission?
We did several exhibitions in the eastern part of Europe, post-Soviet republics and others that are still not in Europe, where the climate is not very healthy. There are a big percent of the population that supports Russia and another that smaller that supports Ukraine. So the idea was to exhibit the work and make it available to everyone that could stop and see. And so people have their personal experience meeting what Ukrainians experience. Because what they see in the news and what they read in the media is not enough to form opinion. And I believe that when you see this boy walking in the ruins of his school, I believe that photography cannot really change directly the world, but could inspire people to change, to work in direction for changes. it was important for me that in these places, people understand that the truth is that Russia invaded Ukraine and Russia commit thousands of crimes, every single war crime that exists, not the other way around.
Mhm.
And that was one of the mission of the exhibit. Another one is coming in Sofia. Now that will be on a public square. It will be, I think, very strong. We'll have direct bridge with Kiev, and photographers from there will speak. So I hope that this will help. This is the only thing I can do.
Mhm. That's great. Thank you, Svetlana. I'm going to stop screen share and come back to all of you. So good to see you and everybody. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I'd love to take some questions from you all. If you don't have any questions, I always have questions, so I will continue the conversation. But do you have any questions, Glenn?
Yeah, we have an earlier question from Harris Kusidis, and this is to all the presenters. Beautiful work from all of them. My question, how do you manage to keep your mental well-being in check during such a challenging setting, both during and after your assignments? Great question.
Yeah, always a great question.
So
Who would
whoever
like
wants
to
to
take
take it.
I
that?
can
Yes,
respond.
please.
It's not easy. And I think in my particular case, and when the full-scale invasion started and then Luca was born, I think I had both postpartum depression and also just depression because of what's happening. So finally, it took me a while, but I went through a course of antidepressants and also therapy, which helped a lot. Now I'm just doing therapy, but also I think sport, friends, family. And for me, honestly, like things like seeing just other people, like for example, when I take Luca to swimming lessons or gymnastics lessons, like they're all the same parents and they all have, children and they all live through the same. Like for me, that helps my mental support, my mental health a lot. But doing really difficult emotional stories, yeah, it usually takes like a while for me after the assignment to get back to being able to function. So like I usually have multiple days when I just try to bring, myself together to be able to continue living and working.
Laetitia and Natalie, you want to add to that? Laetitia?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's a very important one as well. Because I don't know how is it for Natalie, and Oksana just described it, but for me, like as soon as as kind of I'm in a mission, like I have this camera and I want to tell a story and I want to give it the best for it, and therefore I will kind of probably, with keeping empathy with my protagonist, because this is always my key entry to their story, I will shut down my own struggles if I recognize I do that, but I'm not aware I'm doing it while I'm doing it. And for me, the hardest is not while I am in Ukraine, actually. It's more when I come back and then I have to readapt to the life here in Munich, where I'm based, and getting, this like listening the story of sometimes my friends or the people I relate to and their struggle, and then don't minimize what their problem or what their situation, because I put it under the scale of what I just live there. And that's a hardest adjustment. That's what I struggle with, I will say. And sport definitely is my so far only where I kind of the stress and also just taking break. To be honest, I have been taking long break between assignment before to be able to just decide to take the camera again and feel ready to go document again and absorb all the story and be able to photograph yeah, to photograph them. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
I would just add quickly, I like, you know, obviously, of course, also again, like, you know, our strategies and our objectives are so different from Oksana's because it's not like daily maintenance and constant, you know, trying to figure out how to digest personal life and the work. You know, for me, when I go to Ukraine or when I'm somewhere else that's dangerous on assignment, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm making a choice, and that's an enormous privilege. I chose to go, and I can choose to leave. So I think it's really important for journalists to be aware of trauma and stress and the effect it has on us. I struggle sometimes because I'm like, I don't want to make too much of a thing about this also, because like there's then things tip into like, oh, my PTSD from taking pictures. We get to decide, bro. So like, I think, but I do think something that's been very useful for me, because I think often there's this culture in journalism of being really, really tough, right? And like, you know, especially like women in like a boys game, but really everybody, it's like, no, it's like, you don't want to show any weakness. You know, but like, I think it's actually much in the same way that an athlete has to take care of their body or it breaks down. A journalist needs to take care of their mental health in order to not be a piece of shit in the field, for pardon my French. But I think like something that I think is really helpful in terms of framing is that this, for me, my strategies are meditation, therapy, friends, hanging out with people that don't do what I do, which is really important to me, all those things. But I think that like we have to take care of our mental health so that we can give our best when we're working. Because I know for me personally, and everybody's coping mechanisms are different, but also everybody's sort of innate reactions to stress and trauma are different. And I lock my emotions down intentionally, but they also just shut down. I have this experience that Laetitia has of like, I'm fine when I'm in the field and I come home and like, but I think I want to be present, emotional, but not emotional for me, but I want to be responding, as Laetitia said, to people in the field, and I owe them that. I owe them emotional presence. And so when I feel my emotions going frozen, which happens at a certain point usually, that becomes like an indication to me that I need to do some like mental housekeeping in order to show up and be present for the people I'm asking to interact with me on the worst days of their lives. So I think thinking of this as sort of almost like a physical maintenance so that we can do our responsibilities correctly is a helpful framework.
Oh, great answers, you guys. Thank you so much. I hadn't looked at the chat at all while we were going because I was trying to keep all the balls in the air, but just been going back and looking through the chat just to notice that Oksana had to leave the video to go in the bathroom because there were sirens going on. So this is so present. It's kind of crazy and amazing. Well, you know, I sit in my very comfortable office while this is going on. So thank you so much for being here, Oksana. I wanted to just, I had a few more questions, but just rolling off of kind of what you guys are saying. I think most photographers, and I know Svetlana as well, that are covering difficult topics, whether it's war or homelessness or immigration. I think one of the motivators for photographers, photojournalists is, you know, wanting to make a difference, somehow have an impact. Somehow this might get through to the people who make the decisions. But I think we all know that the likelihood of that often is very slim. And I know, Natalie, you have said that that you don't believe that making photographs and publishing them is enough. And that makes me wonder, like, I know that this is the motivation, but when that doesn't happen, like, how do you kind of cope and what keeps you going? And also, is there ever enough we can do? I don't know. Well, I don't know that, but anybody want to talk about that? Your motivation to doing this work, and then when it that keeps you going through the tough times and the times when people aren't really paying attention and they've gone on to the next bad problem in the world? What keeps you going?
I can jump in
Go ahead.
quickly. I like it just because you were mentioning that I said. I don't think it's enough. I think it's really important. I think there was an old school way of thinking that, like, okay, if we, like I mentioned before, like if we speak truth to power, if we like, and that it'll change something. And the reason that I think it's important to say out loud as a photojournalist that shooting pictures and publishing them is not inherently changing anything, especially in the corporate capitalist structures within which we all have to work with the best intentions usually. Like, I think that it's, for me, it's about accountability. If you say, okay, if I take these pictures and publish them, then I've done my best, then you're not really examining, okay, like what news, power, media structures am I playing a part in? What impact is it actually having, right? So like Svetlana is talking about in the process of her book, you know, making these books that we're all participating in, which I think is an incredible process. She's identifying the Russian long history of erasing history and erasing truth, and saying, okay, this is this preservation of history and this insistence on viewing in this particular permanent way, in this interactive international way, that's going to be the battle that I fight. I really respect that. I'm really honored to be a part of that. I think for those of us who, you know, I feel in my process that I've become much less convinced that if people see my pictures in major magazines, they're going to change anything. But I want the people that I photograph to know that they matter to me. I want to preserve, and I think that in that personal interaction that I have with people I photograph, and then when I go home and talk about it and get privileged to be in spaces like this, I think that matters. I believe a lot more in individual change that's created through the process of making this. And then also that the process of making these images and learning what I learn changes me. You know, there's a Buddhist concept, and meditation is a huge part of my thing now. Like, that you really can't change anybody else. You can only change yourself, and that your changed self will change people on an individual level. And I kind of believe in that. But I think the point is to be clear that there's really selfish parts of photography too, especially those of us that are going in and out at will, and this is not happening to our home, right? And so I think if we're always thinking of like photography and how can I like adapt this medium to make it the most helpful, rather than just kind of letting ourselves off the hook and saying I'm doing a public service, that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. I like to say, and I have one of my students and book photographer, Ellen, is here. Hi, Ellen. I like to say that beauty is a powerful tool to help people to care, and I just wonder if you all agree with that, and if that is something that you think about while you're working. Laetitia, can you talk about that? Do you believe that beauty is part of your practice?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it's actually it's an entry point. It gives an entry point to stop maybe scrolling, or it just helps the people to enter into a story without yet waiting what they're going to grab as a story underneath this beauty. But for me, it's very important. The aesthetic on my pictures, I think it's part also of being able to add poetry into what you say. It's not to minimize, it's not to diminish the gravity of a situation, but it's just a way to give somehow, to create bridges and narrow the distances between the scene, the event, which is sometimes can be hard, and then the viewer situation and his life, and I think that beauty helps to create these bridges in order to be seeing these photos and these stories, and therefore somehow raise a certain awareness. Yeah, I hope. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we've tipped over our deadline for this talk. I was wondering, Svetlana, would you like to have the last word?
This is very, very demanding. But it came to my mind that by showing beauty, it's a kind of you show people what they could still preserve, something that is beautiful and exists and still could be preserved, and we could lose it, rather than showing direct destruction, because many people are not strong. They don't know how to deal in a difficult situation. So preserving is easier than facing destruction and ugliness in communicating, in my opinion. I mean, what I learned from the books.
Mhm. Yeah, me too. I agree. And I think all three of these photographers use that in how they connect their work and themselves and to the audience who sees their photos. I want to thank you so much, all of you, for coming, all of our people, fantastic people in the audience who came and stayed, and to Oksana and Laetitia and Natalie and Svetlana and Glenn. Thank you for giving us this wonderful opportunity.
Well, thank
Appreciate
you
it
so much.
everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you,
Amazing
Sarah. Thank you,
comments.
photographers. Thank you.
Yeah.
And give them an applause. Everybody, a real clap.
With that. Yeah.
And there's some, I don't know if there's a way to save all these comments somehow so the panel and everybody gets a chance to look at them, because there's some wonderful things that were expressed in the comments. Is there a way that?
Yeah, actually, the chat is saved, and when I send out a link to the video, I could include the chat.
Yeah,
And I
it'd be
encourage
great.
the photographers to look at it, because there's a lot of
Really
congratulatory
nice. Yeah.
comments about your
Yeah.
photographs.
Yeah, and everything. Thank you so much. It was really an honor and a pleasure to be with everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Good day.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.